Hello everyone, and welcome to an analysis of Game 1 of the World Chess Championship match between Carlsen and Caruana. Yes, it's finally here. We've been waiting for this match all year long. So in the first game, Caruana has the white pieces, and he opens with e4. Carlsen responds with c5, the Sicilian defense. And Caruana probably didn't expect this move, as he took quite a while to weave his way out of the opening. Maybe he thought Carlsen would opt for something more solid like e5. But Carlsen plays c5. And we have the Sicilian Rosolimo variation from Caruana. So here, pretty standard moves. Black develops his bishop on g7, h3, stopping white from going bishop g4. Both sides develop. Knight d7, so Carlsen might be intending knight f8 and reroute his knight to d4 in the future. e5, so giving this knight a square on e6, white castles, b6 just protecting c5 before knight to f8, and knight to h2 from Caruana, intending to push f4. Knight f8, f4, and this is actually a novelty. Previously, queen d2 has been played. So f4 from Caruana, e takes f4, and here the natural instinct would be to play bishop takes f4. And after knight e6, well, here black occupies d4 with his knight. So what's the difference between bishop takes f4 and rook takes f4 here? So the difference is that after rook takes f4, which was what Caruana played, after knight to e6, rook f2, knight d4, the difference is that here white has an extra tempo because of this rook being on f2, and queen d2 and rook a to f1 seems to follow naturally. So after rook takes f4, Carlsen didn't play knight to e6, instead he played bishop to e6, which makes sense because this rook is impeding the bishop on e3, so Carlsen doesn't feel a need to play knight to e6 to chase the rook back. So bishop to e6 also keeps watch of the f7 square. So rook back to f2 from Caruana, and h6, just stopping white from having plans like queen d2 and sticking the bishop on h6. Well, not immediately because then bishop d4 would come, but white could do that at the right moment. So h6 just stopping that. Queen to d2 anyway from Caruana, trying to connect the rooks. And g5. So now it becomes clear that Carlsen is most likely going to castle queenside. Rook after a1, queen d6, pretty natural moves. Knight to g4 and black castles queenside. The black king is actually reasonably safe here. It's not so easy for white to generate an attack because of this pawn on c5. So this double pawn turns out to become an asset for black, controlling the d4 square and also stopping white from expanding with b4. So here black's attack also seems to come a bit quicker compared to white. If white tries a4, then h5, and something like this would follow, e5, queen c7, knight to f6, and here g4 just attempting to blast open the king side. So probably something like this, bishop f4, knight to g6. And so here black, I would prefer black's chances because of this nice open h-file. So here after e5, if black decides to take with the bishop, then after knight takes, queen takes, bishop g5, bishop takes g5, attacking the rook on d8, and white has bishop to f6, which would help him to win material. So here, after Carlsen castled queenside, Caruana goes knight to f6, and he now tries to set up a blockade on the light squares. Knight d7, trying to challenge this knight, but knight to h5, bishop e5, and g4. So you can see Caruana is just blockading on the light squares. And f6. Carlsen is preparing to play bishop to f7, attacking this knight. The knight doesn't have any good squares. Caruana goes b3, bishop f7, knight to d1. So this knight could help with the defense in the future, maybe coming to f2. And knight to f8 from Magnus. Well, he could take here on h5. And then knight to f8. Black could try to go after this pawn, this weak pawn on h5 with knight to e6, knight to g7. Another idea after knight to d1 is just queen to e6, which is a very logical move because after bishop takes, then black is going to take on h3. But instead of these ideas, Carlsen plays knight to f8, just wanting to bring his knight into this very juicy f4 square. So this allows knight takes f6 from Caruana. But Carlsen carries on with his plan. So here he takes the knight, doubling white's pawns, and then knight to f4. So Caruana removes the knight because it is rather annoying. G takes f4. And here white has to be a bit careful. If something like king to h1, then queen to e6, looking at this pawn. And if rook f3 defending, here rook h to g8, threatening to go rook to g5 and take this pawn. Then after that, this pawn would also be threatened. So here rook to g2 from Caruana. So queen to e6 can be met by rook coming to g4. So after rook to g2, Carlsen plays rook h to g8, queen to e2, really trying to blockade on the light squares. And then the rooks are traded. Queen to e6, knight to f2, rook to g8, and now knight to g4. Carlsen goes queen to e8, looking at the pawn on h5. And black is most likely going to regain the pawn. Queen f3 from Caruana, queen takes h5. So black regains the pawn with quite a nice initiative against white's king. King f2 from Caruana. So Caruana tries to run his king away from the action. Bishop c7. Since the knight is no longer pinned, the bishop is under fire, so Carlsen drops the bishop back. And king to e2 from Caruana, which is an inaccuracy. Instead, he should try the move e5 in this position, just trying to close this diagonal from black's queen, also opening up an attack on c6. And now this bishop is also cut from the defense of the f4 pawn. But okay, king to e2, it's quite difficult to play these kinds of very sharp positions. And here Carlsen plays a very nice move, queen to g5. This is a multi-purpose move, threatening to come on the dark squares with maybe queen to g7, coming in potentially on c3 or b2. Also, this makes room for a pawn coming to h5. Caruana goes knight to h2, and Carlsen plays h5. But maybe there wasn't a need for this move since white already retreated the knight to h2. Instead here, instead of playing h5, queen to e5 is very strong, threatening to come in on the dark squares. Also threatening rook to g3. This looks very difficult for Caruana to defend. But okay, h5 from Carlsen. Rook to f2. Queen to g1, so Caruana stops the queen from coming into white's position with knight to f1. And h4 from Carlsen. Maybe more urgency was needed in this position instead of h4. Again, queen to g7 seems strong. If king to d2, then queen to b2, and this is already very unpleasant for white to deal with. For example, if he tries to save the pawn, then here bishop to e5, threatening to go bishop c3, And the white king seems to be caught in a mating net. Just for illustration purposes, let's say white plays h4, bishop c3 check. Queen b1 followed by queen to e1 would be checkmate. So already very unpleasant after queen to b2. If white tries queen takes h5, bishop e5, again coming on the dark squares. White can give a check, but here after king b8, king d1, white doesn't have any more checks. Rook to g1 is very unpleasant, just pinning this knight, threatening to go queen to b1. White is probably just losing here. But instead, Carlsen plays h4, and we have king to d2. Instead of king to d2, here again Caruana had the idea of going e5. So now white is preparing to take here, also opening up an attack on c6. So if black goes bishop takes e5, then white goes queen takes c6, then a4 threatening a5, and white could get a perpetual in this position. But of course this is not an easy move for white to play, because black doesn't have to take on e5, he can go rook to g5 here, keeping things complicated. If queen takes f4, then this is good for black. After rook takes e5 check, king d1, this wins the queen. So after rook g5, white's best is probably to play king d2, run away and hope for the best. But okay, we have king to d2 in this position. Carlsen goes king to b7, so stopping the white queen from giving any checks. And c3 from Caruana, just cutting out the dark squares from black. So black goes bishop e5, king to c2, and queen to g7 from Carlsen. Maybe it wasn't needed because the queen puts a lot of pressure being on g1. Carlsen instead could have tried b5, opting for b4, trying to pry open the dark square diagonal. But here he plays queen to g7, going after c3. And now knight to h2. Well, black could return with queen to g1. That would probably be the best move. But Carlsen goes for the c3 pawn. Queen takes f4. Here bishop to d4 because white was threatening to play queen to f7 check. And then he will win the bishop on c3. So here Caruana plays queen to f7 check. So the pieces are traded off. And Fabi has to be happy that the queens are off the board. And he is not getting mated anytime soon. Rook to e2. Just getting behind the passed pawn. And ready to push. Rook g3 from Carlsen. Going after h3. Knight g4. Rook takes h3. And now Caruana pushes the pawn. So Carlsen has to bring the rook back to stop the pawn from promoting. And he is just in time. Rook to e8. Caruana now plays knight to h6, intending knight to f5 to support this pawn so that this rook is freed up to move. h3, knight f5, bishop f6, and a3. So b5 from Carlsen. b4, so this now fixes the structure on the queen side. And here a nice tactical shot from Carlsen. Bishop takes e7. So here h2. And now black regains the piece because of the threat, black's threat of queening the pawn. So white has to go rook takes h2. Now rook takes e7. Magnus is up a pawn here, but this is probably not enough to win this position, with all the pawns being on the same side of the board. So both players play on. Magnus, as usual, tries to get any chance that he can have out of the position, but this looks like it's going to be a draw. And I'm not going to go too deep into the analysis here. I'll just play the moves. And here rook to a4 from Carlsen, setting a very cunning trap, because now this pawn is under attack. So the first instinct would be to play king to b3, but then king to b7 from Carlsen. And if rook d4, trying to defend his pawn, because here black is going to go a5, he can still go a5 anyway here. After b takes, king to c7, and suddenly this white rook cannot maintain control of d4. After something like rook h8, rook takes d4, and now black has two connected passers. This pawn on a5 is also very weak. Black can try and play rook to a4 to gobble up this pawn. So here, very accurate defense from Caruana, king to c3, protecting both b4 and d4. And here, after this, there's not much that black can try now. And the players go on for quite a bit, but I'm not going to bore you with unnecessary explanations. I'll just carry on playing the moves. Carlsen gives checks, but this doesn't accomplish much. Here, after king to d5 from Carlsen, it seems like he is going to win this pawn, but king b2 from Caruana, very nice move, chases the rook away from the defense of a6. So after rook d3, and this is just dead drawn after king to b3. Even if black manages to exchange one of these pawns off, white can easily hold this ending. So rook to e4, well, if Magnus tries to play c5, just for illustration purposes, then rook g6. If the king marches forward, king to c4, white can always give checks. Rook g4, and black's king cannot make any progress. He has to go back. If he tries here, rook to d4, then white can take. Then this is a theoretically drawn king and pawn endgame after king to b3, threatening king b4, so black has to go back, king to c5. But here, king to c3 and white draws because his king is in front of the pawn, and also he has the opposition against black's king. So here, rook to e4 from Carlsen. They play on for a while more, but yeah, just for the spectators, just for the fans. Here it's a very well-known drawn ending. And rook to a8 here, and both players agreed to a draw. So that was a very tense start to the World Championship match. Magnus has to be a bit disappointed not being able to convert that edge he had during the middle game. Not the start that Fabi was hoping for, but kudos to him for defending well throughout a very long game. So tomorrow is game 2, still a lot to play for. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.